The weekly Cybercrime and Business Podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact to their business, and proactively address threats head-on.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hack Surfer's Weekly Podcast. Today is Friday, January 30th, 2015. Joining us on the panel today, we have Michael Felt, Surfwatch Labs data analyst, Jeff Peters, the editor of Hack Surfer, and I'm Matt Lightfus. I'm a writer for Hack Surfer. Make sure you stay tuned after the podcast for Jeff's interview with Harry Sverdlove. Sverdlove is the CTO of Bit9 plus Carbon Black, and they talk about security teams getting way too many alerts, and Carbon Black 5.0. Starting off this week, Jeff, what do you want to start talking about?
Well, as much as it pains me to do so, because I really am sick of talking about Lizard Squad, the top two most discussed targets this week were Malaysian Airlines and Taylor Swift, and both of them were tied to the Lizard Squad group. I don't know if you want to maybe tell us a little bit more if you know what happened, Matt?
Lizard Squad is just... They've had some tweets, and they're claiming, they've even are claiming more attacks at these two, but with Malaysia Airlines had their website defaced, and there were actually, it was more than just Lizard Squad that was claiming the attack. We also saw ISIS in there, and then this other group called Cyber Caliphate. Of course, with Lizard Squad, there's always seems to be speculation of whether they're actually behind the attacks. So that's kind of what's going on with Malaysia Airlines. Mike, do you want to fill us in with Taylor Swift?
Well, apparently Taylor Swift's social media accounts, both her Twitter and Instagram, were compromised by supposed members of Lizard Squad. On her Twitter account, they posted a link to a Lizard Squad-controlled social media account saying people should follow that account. And also they threatened to release inappropriate pictures of Swift. But immediately after, I think it was about 15 minutes, Miss Swift's representatives most likely regained control of the account and immediately started mocking the hackers. But just based off Surfwatch Labs data, social media hijacking is an extremely common occurrence, and motivations for doing it vary. One is just to be annoying, as in this occurrence, or it's to spread spam or malicious links. One occurrence of that was a while ago. Justin Bieber's Twitter account was hijacked and redirected people to a malicious website. And most of the time, these criminals are targeting the celebrities because they have the most followers. So, one of the key lessons from this is always have some sort of two-step authentication associated with your accounts and have decent passwords.
You know, what I kind of find, I guess, frustrating a little bit in terms of media coverage, basically, is it's kind of the same issue I've had with hacktivists. You know, not that they don't cause damage and not that we shouldn't talk about that stuff, but obviously Twitter account hijacking a Taylor Swift or a website defacement isn't probably the most important thing, risk-wise, although it seems to be, the most discussed thing in terms of media. I guess moving on, is there anything else that stood out in this week's data?
There was a Russian dating website called TopFace that leaked 20 million visitors' email addresses. And that's pretty huge, considering how valuable email addresses really can be to cyber criminals.
Yeah, and this story was actually fairly interesting because it seemed like the media was kind of getting it wrong. I won't call out specific people, but it was definitely implied in the beginning that credentials were leaked, which to me means like passwords and other login stuff. And some outlets were reporting how potentially these credentials could be reused to log into different sites. But it turns out that, at least from what I've read, that it was just emails that were leaked or that were actually for sale. And the company who I saw this morning actually bought back those emails. So I guess it worked out good for the hacker. He made some money. But I don't think there's too much of a threat here.
I think what's very interesting about this story is that TopFace called the payment an award for finding a vulnerability, which is an interesting spin on paying a criminal to get back vital information, which is always a slippery slope when you're having to deal with that.
Yeah, so that's definitely an interesting story, but it seems like it's kind of wrapping up as long as the hacker doesn't resell that information. I also saw that AT&T was in the news. I believe it was the fourth most discussed target from the past week. Do you know anything about that, Matt?
Yeah, and I thought this was really interesting because I think this speaks directly to companies and taking customer data security seriously. It's been reported a lot that AT&T has been very lax on some of their interactions with customers. For instance, what is being found is that the way AT&T texts their customers with updates and everything, they're doing it in a way that would make it very easy to replicate, meaning that a hacker could potentially have a customer's phone number or email address and very easily replicate an email that looked like it was coming from AT&T, and then the customer, clicks a link or gives information. Well, now that hacker has the information. The other thing AT&T is doing is they're using links that aren't obviously associated with the company. So they might provide a link to a customer that doesn't even say, and I should have wrote down the example, guys, and I'm sorry about that, but they'll use links that don't obviously say like AT&T in them. So customers are getting used to being like, okay, well, I'm getting this update from AT&T. Here's this link. It doesn't say anything about AT&T, but this is what they've done before, so I'm going to click it. Well, that's kind of a big deal because hacker gets the user's information. They just, give them some random link, and these customers are so used to clicking links that aren't associated with AT&T necessarily, they'll click it. And, there you go again. So just kind of really pointed out companies. It's another story of a company not taking security seriously. And in spite of everything we've seen in 2014, these are the types of things that need to stop.
Yeah, and that story is interesting as well because, especially on the mobile front, I think users are conditioned that things always look different on their mobile phone. So if you get an email or you get a text message, obviously like the links and stuff are gonna look different on there than they're gonna look, in an email on, say, your web browser. So there's already kind of that added element of kind of users sort of accepting that. And then obviously if that just kind of amplifies, some of the issues that are already there with mobile. So those were the top 4, I guess, new targets of the week. Taylor Swift, Malaysian Airlines, TopFace, and AT&T. Another interesting story, though, that I saw just yesterday was this new attack called Ransom Web. There's been a lot of talk about ransomware, and we've talked about it a lot on this podcast. But this Ransom Web attack, basically instead of targeting an individual computer, it's targeting and encrypting entire websites' databases and then holding them hostage in order to extort money. So this happened once, this company, High Tech Bridge. They noticed it with one of their companies, a financial company, in December, and they thought it was just a kind of a one-off targeted attack. But then they saw a second similar attack against a small business last week. So they're just thinking it could be kind of a trend of this new thing. And what's interesting about this is that it's, usually when we talk about ransomware, we talk about having backups and things like that in order to, prevent it. But they said that this attack is almost impossible to recover from because what also happens is the backups get encrypted as well. So I thought that was an interesting story, and a lot of the people that we've been interviewing here on HackSurfer keep bringing up ransomware and ransom attacks and extortion as kind of one of the big attack vectors that we're going to see really jump in 2015. So I think it's important that businesses are at least aware of this possibility. If this attack is detected, it can be stopped. And you can find more about that attack on High Tech Bridge's blog. So if you just Google High Tech Bridge. There was one other, I guess, kind of important announcement this week. The Ghost vulnerability, which was announced on Tuesday. Basically what this does is it can be used to covertly gain complete control of a targeted Linux system. But I also believe, I was reading some articles yesterday, and I think it was on Threat Post, they were saying that it also could affect WordPress as well. It could potentially be a serious vulnerability, but it also sounds like it's something that would be fairly difficult for attackers to pull off, at least at the moment. And several providers have provided patches already. So that's it for this week's discussion. Moving on, we have the cyber tip of the week. One thing that kind of stood out to me when reading about this TopFace breach with 20 million emails being put up for sale was the CEO said that about 95% of its users access the service through their social media accounts. I just thought that was an interesting thing to point out because a lot of people I know, they use their Facebook or their Twitter account to log into a lot of different stuff, including hacksurfer.com. You log in through Twitter. And you get a lot of people talking about reusing user credentials, but I don't really see much where people talk about kind of consolidating your logins under one social media. So obviously, if you log into 20 different websites through Facebook and someone compromises your Facebook account, then they can get into all those different websites. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're using those social media sites for individuals or for businesses. Make sure, that you're using things like two-factor authentication on those social media accounts to kind of help limit the damage should those accounts get compromised.
Please, please, please stop using weak passwords, everybody. That's the easiest thing you can do. Stop using weak passwords. Put a little effort into it. Think of a way to remember a password. Use that instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Another good piece of advice would be to maybe invest in a password manager. There's several great solutions out there. But if you don't want to invest in a password manager, there's a good concept called chunking. Go ahead and Google it. It's about using chunks of information that you can easily remember and putting them all together in order to form a pretty secure password, I should say.
So coming up, we have an interview with Harry Sverdlove, who we interviewed yesterday. He is the CTO of Bit9 plus Carbon Black, and they just announced the release of Carbon Black 5.0 on Tuesday, so we discussed that and a few other issues pertaining to cybersecurity. You guys just announced Carbon Black 5.0 on Tuesday, so maybe we could start there if you want to give us a quick overview of what that is and what your company does.
Sure. Well, first of all, nice to meet you, Jeff. Thanks for having me. We're very excited at Bit9 plus Carbon Black. We have been the leaders, and we are the leaders in advanced prevention and incident response technologies. And with this latest release, Carbon Black 5.0, we're very excited about this because we think it takes detection and response technology to the next level. Carbon Black is a technology that's best way to think about it is essentially a DVR for your endpoints, and it records all file, process, registry, and network connectivity, and collates that information in real time in the back end with threat intelligence so that you can do real-time detection. And then when it's time to do response, you have all of that information at your fingertips. And with Carbon Black 5.0, we've introduced a number of significant features. Among them is the ability for the sensor that's deployed, that's recording all this information, to not just be a visibility and detection tool, but also to have interactive capabilities so that you can, when dealing with a suspect incident or investigating a potential situation, you can isolate your endpoints so you can cut them off and quarantine them from all network connectivity. You can kill files, download a file, execute different investigation commands. So essentially you can take control of that system and perform further investigation. We've also enhanced our threat intelligence, which is used to analyze and take a look at all of the information that we are recording with a number of advanced feeds to look for not just indicators of compromise, but indicators of adversary activity, of potential suspicious activity, different things that you might want to be on the alert for within your organization. And we've provided a whole new alerting framework to allow you to really manage and monitor your alerts and your notifications so that you can track what you're working on at any given moment. You can report against the effectiveness or the productivity of your security analysts. So we're reporting something that we call dwell time, which is how long it takes from the time something suspicious occurs to the time that you're able to investigate and act upon that. so that you can report back to upper management exactly how many alerts you're dealing with on a regular basis and how effective your team is at investigating and closing those investigations.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up alerts because, over the past, I guess, couple months, I've been seeing a lot of articles just basically talking about how there's too many alerts and, all these security people are overwhelmed by the amount of alerts. And I'm just wondering if you can maybe put that in perspective, for someone like me who's kind of on the outside. I'm not really, on the inside dealing with these alerts. How big of a problem is that for a lot of organizations?
Sure, absolutely. The problem of what we call alert fatigue is huge. And you can see this in many of the recent high-profile breaches that we've read about where, for example, there have been incidents and later in retrospect you learn that 50,000 alerts had triggered that could have been used to notify the company that they were in fact under attack. And a lot of people will read those numbers and go, wow, how did you miss 50,000 alerts? But in reality, the average security operations center is dealing with, if not hundreds of thousands, millions of alerts every single day. So we're dealing with terabytes, in some cases, hundreds of terabytes of information, where there are alerts going off all the time. And one of the challenges is, well, if you've got so many alerts, how do you know, how do you find that needle in a haystack? How do you know what to do? So one of the things that, we'd like to do, and one of the things that Carbon Black allows customers to do is really to change the paradigm of how we do incident response. Traditionally, you have an alert. You have to figure out first which alerts are interesting or actionable, and then you've got to go through this process of gathering information about each alert, going to the system, maybe pulling the hard drive or doing some forensics investigation. It could take anywhere from 10 minutes to 10 hours to 10 days, and it's always an uphill battle. So we do our data collection after we get the alert, and we think that that's simply not sustainable in a world when you're dealing with millions, if you will, of alerts. And so instead, we do the data collection, and with a technology like Carbon Black, it allows you to do the collection first. So you're always collecting, you're always recording, so that when alerts trigger, you have the context right then and there. And give you for example, a real-world example. Let's say you see an alert because there's some sort of suspicious file that has been dropped, or a malicious file that's being dropped, or on a particular system. You have immediately at the Carbon Black console access to how did that file arrive, where did it come from, what user was involved at that point, did it talk to any other addresses, and so within seconds, not hours, not days, but seconds, you can immediately determine root cause. For example, maybe it was an unpatched version of Adobe, or it was a specific malicious domain that the user had been browsing to, and you can address that root cause. And what we've found is that simply addressing the common root causes, the average customer can reduce their alerts, the types of things that they're getting, by up to 90%. Again, this all gets back to collect the information first. Don't go chasing it once you get an alert. The other aspect that we do to help deal with, if you will, this alert fatigue is the incorporation of threat intelligence. So overlaying all of these feeds that you have, all of this information, with intelligence about what's normal in your organization, what are known suspicious things. And so we work with a number of third-party intelligence providers as well as our own threat research to provide ratings, to provide indicators and watch lists that customers can use to help really sift through the wheat from the chaff, to actually find the alerts that are worth investigating, that are worth tracking down, and then to provide that visibility to rewind the clock right there to see what happened back in time, so that not only do we help you filter the alerts, but we take the process of investigating them from days or hours down to seconds.
Yeah, I guess my impression, at least from all the articles and stuff that I've read, is that a lot of companies aren't doing this technology at the moment. I don't know if you agree with that, and if so, I'm just wondering why you think it's just a matter of time before they adopt it, or are they lacking in funds, or is there maybe other reasons at play?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's interesting because a lot of companies aren't yet there. They aren't yet at the point where they're changing the way they do incident response. And yet, if you look at similar technologies, for example, on the network, a lot of companies deploy technologies like NetWitness or Solera, where they're doing recording and inspection on the network, even though they're not yet acting on it, but so they have that information should they later need to use it. And the technology has just come that we can now do that same level of recording, that same fidelity at the endpoints. And that's really where attacks are happening. And when you have the information on your systems, where the attacks are actually occurring, not just on your network, on the transport, if you will, you have much more actionable intelligence. So I do think that more and more customers are going to be deploying these technologies. Certainly, we've seen in the last year with different security companies, and you've seen this at RSA and in other places, that everybody's talking about endpoint. Because if you will, networks don't get infected. Endpoints get infected. Networks are just transport vehicles. So performing security on the network, you're always having to interpret. You're always sort of reading the tea leaves. But actually having that information on your systems, knowing what's running, knowing how things came about, that's where you can really achieve scales of economies of scale.
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about alerts and, visibility that businesses need. I'm just wondering if there's, any other common issues or things that you see when dealing with customers that businesses need to improve on.
Absolutely. We talk often times about having advanced or next generation security to deal with what we often call the advanced persistent threat or the targeted attacker. But the majority of cybersecurity risks out there really can be addressed through normal hygiene, through just good hygiene, through patching, and through just correct governance and policies. So it's not just about addressing the most sophisticated or the most advanced attacks. We are seeing that customers using our technology, and certainly just in terms of understanding what's happening in the organization, by applying the right patches, by making sure that their network policies, their firewall policies are up to date, that they're able to reduce the overwhelming majority of risks, the overwhelming majority of malware that's actually arriving. Most attacks, if you will, information security activity is actually just dealing with common malware or drive-by downloads and botnets and other opportunistic sort of attacks that are out there. And so in many cases, it really is first, before you learn how to do advanced things, before you learn how to run, you have to learn how to walk. It's just getting their house in order and applying good hygiene practices. And the first step to doing that is knowing, what you have out there, is knowing what versions of Adobe are out there, what versions of your browser are out there, having that visibility so that you can then prioritize, where am I going to start putting my patches, where am I going to start putting my focus so you can get the biggest bang for your buck. Because the truth is that you'll never have infinite resources or infinite time, and so you have to be able to prioritize where you're going to put your focus to minimize your risk as much as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I've heard that from a few people that, a lot of companies focus more on the advanced stuff and then you end up missing something really simple. I don't know if you could maybe explain, why that is. It seems like obviously that would be the first thing that you should do, is kind of start with the simple stuff and move up. But do you think that there's maybe a reason why companies are doing that? Is it just they don't have the information that they need?
The challenge, of course, is the technology is constantly expanding. And so we're always, on a daily basis, bringing more into our organizations, into companies, and very rarely bringing less in. So we have older systems, and then we add newer systems, and then we bring in our smartphones and our BYOD, and we bring in new systems and new technologies. Meanwhile, the old technologies are still there, often sort of forgotten about or left in a backroom closet or on somebody's desktop. And so what you end up with is a cumulative effect. And in many cases, the vulnerabilities, the known vulnerabilities that were reported in Windows years ago, in some cases several years ago, for which there have long since been patches, are still being used by adversaries today to compromise systems. And I think a lot of that just has to do with most organizations. If you were to ask your average organization, what are all your systems and what's running on them, can't answer that basic question. So the ability just to answer the basic question, what are all my systems and what's running on them right now? They don't have the tools or the technology yet to answer that. And technologies like Bit9 plus Carbon Black allow customers to answer that. And then you can start addressing, as we've been talking about, these basic hygiene issues.
I wanted to ask you about a specific threat. There's been a lot of talk about ransomware. I guess like pretty much all of 2014, there's a lot of talk about it. And then just this morning, I saw an interesting article basically talking about this ransom web attack where basically instead of going after individual PCs, they're encrypting entire website databases. I don't know if you've really been following that too much, but just wondering your thoughts, because a lot of people are sort of predicting that this is going to be like an increasing, cause of concern. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts.
Absolutely. We have certainly been following that, both in terms of providing protections for our customers within our product, but also just from understanding, from threat intelligence, understanding where the market is. And quite honestly, adversaries certainly criminal adversaries go where the money is. Ransomware, the concept has been around for a very long time. And when it started making high-profile news earlier last year, we talked about that and recognized that, in fact, it would increase. The fact that it is successful is an invitation for other cyber criminals to do this. Now, the fact that more and more valuable information is being stored in the cloud, is being stored on web servers, is being stored on remote locations, if you will, makes that a natural target as well for concepts of ransomware. The ransomware is becoming more prevalent because it works. And in many cases, it works. They're not using that advanced of techniques. They're using very simple, some cases just social engineering techniques, tricking users into running something through a spear phishing or a phishing campaign. In other cases, they do use known vulnerabilities. But the techniques, they're fairly easy to prevent. It's just because, if you will, they're finding the holes, those basic hygiene holes within corporations. And because it's so easy for them to be successful, we're certainly going to continue to see the rise of ransomware. And it's not surprising that we're starting to see the target of that, I guess you refer to it as ransom web, but change its focus to wherever there are assets that can be encrypted to get money. And the servers make perfect sense because in many cases, putting ransomware on your end users' computers, well, a lot of companies are just re-imaging them. But if you're putting it on your critical servers or your back-end systems, companies, it's harder to just re-image such systems. So they're more likely to have a profit from that.
That's pretty much all the questions I have, unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on quick.
I think as mentioned, really security now, as you've mentioned, with the increase of new devices, with cloud computing and web servers and mobile computing, the surface area is constantly increasing, and the attackers are, in some cases, getting more sophisticated, in other cases, just getting more opportunistic, such as the case with ransomware. And what we believe is a new paradigm, just a new way of looking at security needs to be enacted so that companies can be successful. And it first starts with basic hygiene. And that hygiene starts with basic visibility, knowing your systems, knowing what's out there. If you have that information, you can start making decisions, prioritizing based on where your risks are. So we're very excited, certainly, about our Carbon Black 5.0 release and some of its new capabilities, its abilities to help you filter that alert fatigue that security teams are dealing with, and also to help you respond and take action even quicker than before. And we certainly look forward to continued improvements as the security landscape and the risks evolve.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the time, Harry. Appreciate it.
Jeff, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this week's Cybercrime and Business Podcast. As always, if you want more information, check out hacksurfer.com and surfwatchlabs.com. And be sure to follow us on iTunes, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and everywhere else.